All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take some of the oldest, most powerful ideas in moral philosophy and use them to tackle one of the toughest, most divisive questions of our time. We'll start with a classic brain teaser you've probably seen before, then we'll pivot to something very, very real. Let's dive in.
Ah, yes, the good old trolley problem. You know this one, right? It's famous because it's designed to be impossible. It forces you into a corner with no good options. Do you step in and actively cause one person's death to save 5? Or do you do nothing and let 5 people die because you didn't act? You know, most of us have a gut reaction to this. But what if there was a more structured way to think it through?
Instead of just going with our gut, we can actually use some established philosophical tools to break the problem down. Think of these as different lenses. Each one lets us see the moral landscape from a totally different angle and helps us understand why we feel pulled in one direction or the other. So let's open up that toolkit. We're going to examine this problem through 4 major philosophical lenses: deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and a fascinating one called the Doctrine of Double Effect.
So first up, we've got deontology. This one is all about rules and duties. For a deontologist, some actions are just flat out wrong, period, no matter what the consequences are. And a pretty universal rule is do not kill. So if you pull that lever, you are making an active choice to kill a person. That's a breach of the rule. So for a strict deontologist, your hands are tied. You can't pull the lever.
Okay, now let's flip that completely on its head and talk about utilitarianism. This framework couldn't care less about rules. It's all about the outcome. The most moral choice is the one that creates the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's basically a numbers game. 5 lives saved is better than 1 life saved. So a utilitarian would argue you absolutely have to pull that lever. It's your moral duty to minimize harm. Then there's virtue ethics, which kind of throws rules and consequences out the window. Instead, it asks a totally different question. What would a good, virtuous person do? What would a compassionate person do? What would a wise person do? And the tricky thing here is there's no easy answer. It really depends on which virtue you think is most important in that moment. It's all about character, not calculation. And our last tool is the Doctrine of Double Effect. This one gets a little subtle because it's all about your intention. It says that an action that has a bad side effect can still be okay as long as that bad side effect isn't what you intended to do. So if you pull the lever, your intention is to save the 5 people. The death of the 1 person is a terrible but foreseen side effect. This framework could actually be used to argue for pulling the lever, since your goal isn't to kill, but to save. So let's do a quick recap. Deontology says don't pull the lever because killing is wrong. Utilitarianism says you must pull it to save the most lives. Virtue ethics says, well, it depends on what a good person would do. And the Doctrine of Double Effect might let you off the hook for pulling it because your intention was good. As you can see, there's absolutely no consensus here. Okay, so we've seen how these tools work on a hypothetical problem. It's a fun puzzle. But these ideas aren't just for classrooms. So let's raise the stakes. Let's apply this toolkit to the real world. What if the life and death choice isn't about some imaginary trolley, but about one of the most personal and politically charged issues there is? So here's the new setup. A woman is in her first 15 weeks of pregnancy and she wants an abortion. Now, imagine society is standing at a lever. It can do nothing and allow her to control her own body, or it can pull a regulatory lever and force her to continue the pregnancy. So how do our philosophical tools handle this one? Let's start with the ontology again, the philosophy of rules. Here, the core rule isn't just don't kill, it's about a deeper principle: respect people's autonomy. You can't use a person as a means to an end. Forcing a woman to use her body to sustain a fetus against her will is a textbook case of violating that rule. You're denying her fundamental right to self-determination. This quote from the source material really hits the nail on the head. By forcing gestation, society stops treating her as a whole person with her own life, rights, and value. She becomes an instrument for something else. From a deontological perspective, pulling that regulatory lever is a profound moral violation. So what about the utilitarian view, the one that's all about consequences and minimizing harm? Well, you have to weigh the suffering. On one side of the scale, you have the very real psychological, physical, and financial harm that can come from an unwanted pregnancy.
On the other side, you have a fetus under 15 weeks, which, as the source points out, doesn't have the capacity to suffer. When you put those on the scales, the utilitarian math is pretty clear. Forcing the pregnancy creates far more suffering.
And virtue ethics? What would a truly virtuous society do? Well, a virtuous society would surely value compassion for people in tough spots. It would value justice, which includes respecting individual rights. And it would certainly try to avoid being cruel. Forcing someone to go through pregnancy and childbirth against their will, according to the source's analysis, just doesn't line up with any of those virtues.
Okay, so let's put it all together again, just like we did with the trolley. Deontology says don't intervene because it violates autonomy. Utilitarianism says don't intervene because that causes more harm. Virtue ethics says a compassionate and just society wouldn't intervene. And the doctrine of double effect? It also lands on non-intervention. Why? Because the primary good intention is respecting a woman's bodily autonomy. The death of the fetus is a foreseen but unintended side effect of that good action. Wait a second, look at that. It's a consensus.
And that's the big, surprising takeaway from the source materials analysis. When you actually apply the major secular moral philosophies of the Western world, whether they're based on rules, outcomes, or character, none of them seem to support forcing a woman to remain pregnant against her will, especially in the early stages. Okay, but you might be thinking, what about the most extreme arguments? The ones that call for an absolute ban with no exceptions for rape, incest, or even to save the woman's life. The source takes that position head on.
The source has some pretty strong words for this absolutist stance, calling it dark age stuff. And the reason is that it reflects a worldview from before the Enlightenment, a time before our modern ideas of individual rights, reason, and bodily sovereignty were really established as core values. It's a mindset that puts dogma above the well-being of a living, breathing person.
Let's just break down why the source sees this as so ethically extreme. Forcing a rape victim to carry a pregnancy to term essentially inflicts a second act of violence upon her. Banning abortion even when the woman will die treats her life as expendable. Her body is just a means to an end. In every one of these cases, it fundamentally dehumanizes the person who is pregnant. And this leads to the source's final, powerful conclusion on this kind of absolutist position. When the state claims this level of total control over an individual's body and biological processes, it's not really operating in a framework of morality or democracy anymore. The source calls it what it is, a form of biopolitical authoritarianism. So the really crucial point to take away from all this is that when you filter this incredibly messy, emotional debate through the logic of these major ethical frameworks, what comes out isn't more confusion. Instead, the source material argues that what you find is a surprising and powerful philosophical clarity, all pointing in the same direction. And that leaves us with one last big question. If the philosophical traditions that are supposed to be the bedrock of modern Western thought are this clear on the issue, why is our real-world political and social debate so incredibly fractured and divided? What else is going on here that these frameworks can't account for? And that is something to think about.